Okay, so hello and welcome everyone. So in this video I am talking about price controls. And so my starting point, to this point we have assumed that wrong prices that are too high or too low, would easily get fixed if they were to occur. So in the case that there would be a shortage, we expect that the price is going to rise and then alleviate the shortage. In the case that there is a surplus, we're going to expect prices are going to fall and alleviate the shortage. And then our realization is, well, sometimes governments will prevent these adjustments to the equilibrium for a variety of different, often well-intentioned reasons that sometimes don't end up carrying through so well. But this would be through price controls. So the two different types of price controls we might expect would be a price ceiling. So this would be a legal limit on how high prices can go, and then a price floor. So that'd be a limit on how low prices can go. So in the case of price controls, we say, well, the price control is going to prevent the market from reaching the equilibrium price. And as a result, because you're going to have a price that's either too high or too low relative to the market equilibrium, you're going to end up with a shortage or a surplus. Okay, so I need to switch my slide. So we'll think about government intervention in markets. Well, we want to start off realizing that the standard equilibrium or standard model is going to result in an equilibrium where we're going to have quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. We're going to have a shortage in the case that the price is too low. Then we'd have quantity demanded larger than quantity supplied. So anytime the price would be below the equilibrium price, you're going to end up getting a shortage because the quantity demanded will be larger than the quantity supplied. You can see that because at all places below the equilibrium, the demand curve is going to lie farther to the right than the supply curve. So when I look across for a given price to find the associated quantity demanded, quantity demanded is going to be larger than quantity supplied when the price is too low. When the price is too high, well, then we're going to get a surplus. Then the quantity supplied is going to be larger than the quantity demanded. And you see that's going to happen because at all places, corresponding to all above equilibrium prices, the supply curve is going to be further to the right than the demand curve. So as I'm looking over and finding the associated quantity demanded or quantity supplied, right, it's going to be the case that quantity supplied will be larger than quantity demanded at all above equilibrium prices. The other intuition, of course, remember, was that sellers like high prices better than buyers. And so when price is too high, sellers are going to be sort of really interested in bringing a larger amount to the market, much larger than consumers are going to be willing to buy from the market. In the case of below equilibrium prices, well, buyers are going to be really excited at this unusually low price. So they're going to demand a larger amount than sellers would be willing to bring at that low price. There's two general concepts to apply as we're thinking about evaluating price controls. The first thing is, when you're looking to see what's going to happen with a given price control, you want to find the quantity demanded and quantity supplied at that price. Of course, it matters, is this a price ceiling or a price floor? In the case of a price ceiling, it's not allowing the price to go any higher. In the case of a price floor, it's not allowing the price to go any lower. And then once we've identified if there's going to be a shortage or surplus, part two, it's important to reflect on what's happening to economic surplus. It's really important to figure out, is this going to be a situation where, or figure out who's going to be gaining, who's going to be losing, and and to carefully disaggregate amongst our winners and losers to figure out exactly how people are being affected. I'll try to do that a little bit later on. Okay, so at prices other than the equilibrium price, we will either get a shortage or a surplus. So I've got two pictures. One is of a shortage, and sure enough, it's because we have a below equilibrium price. I put P low because the price is too low. And then over here, we have a surplus when we have an above equilibrium price, P high, price is too high. And what I like to do, I think I certainly recommend everybody do this in your own supply and demand diagram, is when you are finding the quantity demanded and quantity supplied associated with a particular price, write down that quantity supplied, for instance, and then this is the at sign, P low, right? And then this is the quantity demanded at P low, right? So that we know that this is the quantity supplied at this price, and this is the quantity demanded at that price. This right here, Q star, the equilibrium quantity, this is the quantity supplied and demanded at this price, at the equilibrium price, at P star. I didn't bother to write that. Maybe I should have. And then over here I did the same thing. This convention can be really helpful. That way you can kind of keep track of, oh, this is the quantity demanded associated with this price. This is the quantity supplied associated with this price. And getting in the habit of doing that can be really useful when you're analyzing the effects of trade, international trade, and tariffs, or raises and falls in the minimum wage and stuff like that, to see what is happening specifically at one price versus another. Okay, so next I want to talk about a price ceiling and a price floor. So I've got a lot of stuff on here. Let me kind of unpack what's going on. In the left panel, a price ceiling is binding if it's set below the equilibrium. In the right panel, a price floor is binding if it's set above the equilibrium. Okay, so why would a price ceiling be binding if it's set below the equilibrium? Well, what binding means is that this is going to impact the market. This is going to have an influence. If the price is set below the equilibrium, price ceiling doesn't let the price go any higher. It stops the price from going higher. The price wants to go higher if the price ceiling is set below the equilibrium, because the equilibrium price is much higher. But the price ceiling provides a legal maximum on the price. And so we say it's binding because the price is stipulated lower than where the market wants it. In the case of a price floor, now you've got an above equilibrium price. A price floor that's going to be binding has to be set above the equilibrium price. Why? Because the price floor doesn't let the price go any lower. And so the price wants to go much lower to the true equilibrium, but the price floor provides a legal minimum of how low the price can go. And maybe it prevents the market from adjusting downward. So that's sort of the idea. Then you can get a non-binding price ceiling, you can get a non-binding price floor. A non-binding price ceiling would be like if the government says you can't sell a gallon of milk for more than $100. Well, okay, great, because the true equilibrium price is much less than $100, right? If you're saying you cannot sell a gallon of milk for more than $100, in 2019 dollars, that's not affecting the market, right? Similarly, if we're talking about the minimum wage, right? A non-binding minimum wage would be if the government would say, you can't pay anyone less than a penny per hour. Okay, great. There's probably not a whole lot of people that are going to voluntarily work for a penny an hour, and so that's going to be a non-binding price floor. Now, if you say that you can't pay somebody less than $20 an hour, all of a sudden now you've got a binding price control. You've got a binding price floor. Why? Because the true equilibrium wage is going to be lower than $20 an hour. Similarly, if you say that you can't charge more than a quarter for a gallon of gas or a gallon of milk, right? That's a below equilibrium price. That'd be a binding price ceiling. Okay, so now in terms of the pictures, price ceiling is binding if it's set below the equilibrium. So here I put P upper bar to indicate that it's a price ceiling. The price isn't allowed to go any higher. Price has to stay below this horizontal line, the upper bar. In this case, the quantity supplied is going to be right here, right? This is the amount that sellers are going to be willing to bring to the market when the price is right here, and the amount consumers are going to be willing to buy at this price is out here. So this would be an example of like a rent control law or a price gouging law, or this would be exactly what would happen if we'd say you can't sell gas for more than 25 cents a gallon, right? Gas station owners wouldn't be very excited. Buyers would be really excited, except we'd have a shortage. And what's going to happen in the shortage? Well, people are going to wait in line for a really long time, and they're going to actually ultimately pay an effective price, a true price that's much larger than whatever would be the price control price, because to be able to get gas at 25 cents a gallon, if the government stipulated that that was the price, it's going to involve quite a bit of waiting in line, which is really wasteful. Okay, so then here's my example for a binding price floor. So this would be like the minimum wage, right? It's not allowing the price to go lower. So I put P lower bar, indicating that this is a binding price floor. The price isn't allowed to go below this line right here. The associated quantity demanded is here because here's where the demand curve corresponds to that price. Remember, in the labor market, labor demand is going to be firms hiring workers, and labor supply, quantity supplied at the minimum wage price, labor supply is going to be workers who are willing to sell their time in the labor market. So interesting, this surplus, give that a special name in the labor market, we call that unemployment, right? So other things equal, the Econ 101 model is going to tell us that binding minimum wage is going to introduce unemployment into the market. So is that a good or bad? Is that good or bad? Well, so we have a lot of questions you've got to answer. Mainstream economics might argue that the minimum wage tends not to be maybe the most accurately targeted social policy, although it's certainly well-intentioned, but it's definitely a case-by-case story. The effect of a minimum wage is going to depend on the facts about the local regional labor market. In particular, you're going to have a lot of questions that you're going to want to answer as a policymaker about whether this minimum wage here would be a good idea, right? The workers corresponding to from 0 to QD, QD is the number of jobs offered, these workers would have gotten a raise from P star to P lower bar by virtue of firms being required to pay them more. So these workers corresponding to those who fill these QD jobs are better off. The workers that would have been hired all the way out to Q star, the workers between QD and Q star, they lost their job. That's disemployment. That's not so good, right? They lost essentially this triangle right here. The triangle that I erroneously went to right here, this would have been the gains to firms that hiring workers up to this point. The lower triangle right here would be the gains to workers if they're hired at P star. Well, if we're not hiring workers, if we're requiring that the wage actually be P lower bar, the only workers hired are going to be out to QD. The people between QD and Q star are going to be unemployed, or they're going to lose their job. So that's bad. So from the standpoint of like social policy, you'd have a lot of questions. You'd want to know, okay, are the losses to the people who lose their job as a result of the minimum wage worse than smaller or larger than the gains to those who keep their job? And then furthermore, we care who they are, right? So you might care like if the people who lost their jobs are predominantly high school students, college students, and the people who who get a raise are primarily single parents, we feel very different about the social impact of that policy than if those roles are reversed and if the raise is going to high school and college students and those losing their jobs are trying to support families. And this is one of the reasons why economists might argue that the minimum wage might be sort of inaccurately targeted policy because of these different things, but like I said, it's sort of a case-by-case story. And then there's other people who are unemployed, those between Q star and QS. QS is the number of people wanting to work at this price. It's a lot of people, a lot more people than the equilibrium price who are willing to work at this higher labor price. But these people who are unemployed when the minimum wage is imposed, these people didn't lose a job, right? Between Q star and QS, they weren't going to be hired at the equilibrium wage. They're only interested in working at this artificially high wage. And so we don't feel maybe, or at least I don't feel the same about these people as these people. These people lost jobs. I feel differently about that than these people who are unemployed but didn't lose a job. Anyway, so that's some of the issues to think about, and I just kind of wanted to model some of the considerations that policymakers would want to walk through in terms of evaluating the effect of a minimum wage. So from the economist's point of view, I'm going to point out the positive facts, so the facts about the effect of the minimum wage. Then there's a bunch of normative statements which involve value judgments, and that's something that economics can lead us to but can't actually answer. So then it's ultimately up to people to sort through those issues in the political sphere, actually. So okay, here's sort of summarizing. Price controls stipulate, well, a legal maximum the price can be, that would be a price floor. A legal minimum the price can be, that'd be a price floor, and a legal maximum the price can be, that would be a price ceiling, right? Generally, these will create either a shortage or a surplus as a result. Anytime they're binding, they definitely will. Now, I give an example here. This is kind of cool. So here I give you an example of a binding price ceiling. Well, let me start off here. Let's start with what I've labeled. You can barely see this. This is in green, D1. This is my initial demand curve. Here's my initial supply curve. And here's this price ceiling, P upper bar. And this is essentially saying the price can rise no higher than this, right? So here's an example. Here's a real-world example this might fit. Suppose this is the market for ice bags, right? For bags of ice, go to the grocery store, buy a bag of ice. Go to the gas station, buy a bag of ice. And this is an anti-price gouging law, this P upper bar. And the anti-price gouging law would say, well, in the state of an emergency, when an emergency has been declared by the governor, the price of necessities can't rise more than 10% above what they were over the past month on average or whatever. Okay, cool. So there'd be this price control in effect on necessities. I suppose we don't have a state of emergency declared, but suppose there, I don't know, whatever. So what's going to be the equilibrium market clearing price of ice bags? How many ice bags did you buy this week? Probably not a whole lot, right? And so this price ceiling really has no effect because, probably also not going to see increases of 10% in a week on ice bags because the demand's not going to fluctuate a whole lot under normal circumstances. Now, suppose there's a natural disaster. Suppose there's a power outage. People have to keep things cold, insulate, whatever it is. And so we have this massive increase in demand. So suppose after some disaster, after there's a power outage, we have this increase in demand from D1 to D2. Rightward shift of demand is going to increase the equilibrium price. It's going to increase the equilibrium quantity from Q1 star to Q2 star. Here's my old equilibrium. Here's my new equilibrium. But we got this price control, which says, oh no, the price is not going to be allowed to rise up to here. Instead, the price must stay here. That's a problem, because when this is my new demand and when this continues to be my supply, the quantity supplied at the price-controlled price is here. The quantity demanded is way out here. Why? The equilibrium price is here. People would be willing to pay, like, I don't know, $20 for a bag of ice, and the government's requiring bags of ice not be charged more than, like, I don't know, $2, $3, $4. So you're gonna have a lot of people eager to buy ice at this price. So we get this shortage. It's a little bit of a problem. And you're going to have some other way to decide who's going to get that ice besides price. So maybe whoever wants to stay in line the longest, or whatever. So what this picture is showing is an initially non-binding price ceiling right here at this original equilibrium when this is my old demand with D1. This does not distort the market in the first case, right? We still get this equilibrium Q1 star and P1 star as long as demand is D1. However, P upper bar is binding when demand becomes D2, when there's this increase in demand, perhaps due to this disaster. And therefore, the new equilibrium price and quantity is not reached because of this price ceiling that's imposed on the market, right? So this is interesting. You have a situation where the price ceiling goes from being non-binding, completely being not a factor, to actually creating substantial distortion in this market. And that's interesting. Okay, so here's my last example, thinking about the effect on the labor market of the minimum wage. So I walked through a lot of this a little bit a second ago. Now I'm going to say it a little bit more rigorously. So here's our labor supply curve. Here's my labor demand curve. The labor demand are firms interested in hiring. The labor supply are people willing to work. Here's our minimum wage. It's saying that the price cannot go below W lower bar. However, the true equilibrium wage is W star, right? Okay, so this is going to create a surplus in the market, which we'll call unemployment. So the true quantity demanded at W lower bar, let's take the price, go to the demand curve, go straight down. This gives me my quantity demanded. This is the number of jobs offered at the minimum wage. That's fewer jobs than the number that would be offered at the equilibrium price. Okay, so then let's look at the number of people willing to work. Well, the quantity supplied at the minimum wage is way out here. This is the number of people willing to work at the minimum wage. So we have this disparity of a lot more people willing to work at this price than firms willing to hire at that price. So we have unemployment. But then, like I said, we're not going to think about everybody's outcomes the same. We want to think about who are the winners and who are the losers, how have they won, how have they lost. Well, later on, once you introduce concept of economic surplus, consumer surplus, producer surplus, then we can think about quantifying the gains and losses to these workers. Right now, let's just identify winners and losers. I've highlighted this portion of the labor supply curve, indicating those workers who keep their job and get a raise with the minimum wage, right? Actually, their producer surplus is going to be below this price, to the left of this line, and above this portion of the supply curve. So this looks like the state of Nevada, right? Producer surplus, this is the gains to workers who keep their jobs after the minimum wage is imposed, is often going to look like the state of Nevada. The gains to firms hiring those workers, consumer surplus, that's right here. Okay, so, but then we have this group of people. These people are disemployed. These are people who lost their job at the minimum wage. These people lost their job at the minimum wage. However, they would have been employed at W star, right? So if there was no minimum wage, these people that I've indicated in green would be working. However, with the minimum wage, they're not working because there's not enough jobs offered, so they're not able to find one. Now, this portion of the supply curve, beyond the original equilibrium, this group is unemployed at W lower bar, unemployed at the minimum wage, but they didn't lose a job as they weren't even looking for one at W star. One way to say this is like, remember, the height of the supply curve is the height of the marginal cost. And in the labor supply, a person's labor decision is strongly dependent on their opportunity cost. What else would you like to do with your time besides work? Right? So these people essentially have high opportunity costs of their time, and the value of their time spent doing other things besides working is higher than the wage, than the equilibrium wage. However, once the wage goes up to this minimum wage, now they're valuing their time spent working more highly than time spent leisure or other activities, right? So that is what's going on. And the interesting thing is that the effect of the minimum wage is different across these three groups of workers. These people actually get paid more and they're better off. These people get paid less. They're no longer working. That's bad. And these people, they're unemployed, but they didn't lose a job. So how do we assess whether imposing this minimum wage is a good idea in this market or not? There's a variety of different sort of social, ethical, normative issues to explore. I suggest one thing we'd want to look at would be, let's compare the gains to those who get a raise to the losses to those who lost their job. And I think that's kind of a good starting point. You know, just because you have some people losing their job as a result of the minimum wage doesn't mean it's not a reason to do it, but it's certainly something that's going to bear further reflection as we consider, you know, what is going to be the best policy for society to decide on. So, okay, very good. Like and subscribe, as they say. I'm going to post another video in a second about other price controls, in particular the recent rent control law in Oregon.